Hi, and welcome to Chapter 8. Chapter 8 will be a little bit more manipulation of strings so that we can understand how to take strings, use them in our code, and hopefully understand them just a little bit better. Let's get started. So we can think of our string as a list of characters. We've already done lists, so hopefully lists make a little bit more sense to you now. So calling a string a list of characters or an array of characters makes a little bit more sense. You can use the same operations on strings that you can do on lists. So we can loop through them, we can index, and we can do other manipulations similar to strings. When we do a string looping, the same way we would do with an index, we can say for character in string, and it will loop through it as though it were a list, as opposed to an individual string. So this is kind of nice if you need to do any manipulation of your strings to take out singular letters, put in new letters at certain places, so on and so forth. So we can loop through our strings, getting each individual character. We can also reference the individual index of a character by its index number. Remember, again, zero based, so the first character of a string is always at index 0, moving on from there. But again, we can reference index 2 of a string, and that will get us the third letter, 0, 1, 2. So the same way that we would with an index or with a list, you can refer to the string and then use those brackets notation and be able to put in a letter in there so that you can see individual letters from that location in your string. We have an index error exception that we've talked about when we talked about exceptions, and this is where you're trying to refer to an index that doesn't exist. If I have a string that only has 5 characters and I try to get the 6th index, it's going to give me an exception. So when you're thinking about your exception handling in your code, you want to be aware of the option of calling an index that doesn't exist in your string and how you want to handle that with your exception handling. So this is kind of taking that exception handling in the list that we've talked about previously and bringing them into the string concept. The same way that we can combine together 2 lists, we can concatenate our strings. You've been concatenating your strings this whole time. You may not have known that's what it was called, but that's the reason why the concatenation operator with that plus symbol works with lists and it works with strings. So when we do our strings, we concatenate together strings. You can take a string, you can use the plus symbol and then a secondary string, and you can combine together or push together those 2 values, those 2 string values. Again, this is the same notation that you would get in a list if you wanted to take 2 lists and combine them together. So using that plus symbol, I can say hello world and then a space in between and concatenate the 3 of those together with plus symbols to be able to make one string that is called my string 3, whatever it is, that is the combination of those strings. An important thing to remember with strings. Strings by nature are immutable. Remember we talked about mutable versus immutable? Strings are immutable. You cannot change them. You cannot edit individual items from inside of your string directly. So if I wanted to have my strings being hello, and I wanted to change that second character or the second index from a L to a W, it will not allow me to do that. You're going to get a string object does not support item assignment. You cannot assign individual indices of a string because strings are immutable. They cannot be changed. That being said, once you create a string, you can reassign it because we do that in Python where you are allowed to have a variable that you reassign to a new value. So I can say my string is hello, and then I can concatenate the first part of my string, the second part of my string with a W in the middle, and create a new string that is the same variable, my string. It looks like I've changed it, but in fact, I've simply reassigned it to a new value. So technically, strings are immutable. They cannot be changed. However, the way we get around that, if you need to, is we simply reassign the variable to a new value. Okay, so if you are trying to change the values of your string, individual indices, you can't do that. But you can reassign it to new values. So again, just like lists, you can slice your string into individual parts, substrings. So you can take the same notation that we did with our lists, where you have a start, an end, and an increment, and all 3 of them are optional. If you want to have the non-option, if you want to have the values all as the defaults, you can just put in the colons. If you wanted to do it that way. So if I had nothing and I just put a singular colon, it would allow me to do that. It would return all of hello world. If you don't want to have the first value, you want to start from the beginning, you can just leave that blank, put in a colon, and then add your ending value. You can do two values, start and end, to get a piece in the middle. And then you can do from the third index to the end by leaving the end variable blank. Again, we also have that incrementer that we did when we talked about splitting lists. So if I want to get every second value, every third value, every fifth value in my list and use that to do that, I can do that. Remember, this is not splitting the list. This is not returning, but this is returning a new list or a new string. So if I take my string and I do the brackets and I do 2 and 5, my string is still completely intact. If I say my string equals my string 2 and 5, now I have reassigned the value of my string to the new value that is just the split. So remember, the act of splitting does not alter the string. The string is immutable, can't be changed. So you can't, I want you to think about that while you're working with strings, that you're not changing the string, you are simply getting a subset as a result, and then you would assign that to a value or to a variable. You can test your strings using any of the functions or operators, Boolean expressions that are given here. So there's the in and the not in operators, and those will ask you whether or not a singular value is in the string or is not in the string. So if I say, here is my text, is 7 in my text? If it was, then it would say print string 7 was found, or it'll be true. That Boolean expression will be true. Remember, Boolean expressions, they return a true or false. You can assign them directly to a variable, or you can use them in your if conditional statement. What I'm doing right here is using them in my if conditional statement, which is perfect because I don't have to assign a variable to it. But remember, those do return either true or false. You don't have to say if 7 in text equals true, because that's already done for you. It's already a true, it's already a condition. But these are Boolean expressions. When you have an expression that returns a Boolean value, this is what happens. So I can say, is 7 in text, or is Pierre not in the text? If he was found, then it would go to the false condition. If it wasn't found, it would be the true condition. So the not in, if this does not exist in. We also have a couple of functions or methods that we can use that will again return a Boolean value, true or false. Is the number alpha or numeric? So these ones are a little bit different. We have the is alpha numeric, is alpha, or is digit. So those three are really important to determine. Is the value either a number or a letter? Is the number a letter, or is the number, or is the variable a number? So I can use these testing methods to determine whether or not my value is the type that I need. Is it an alpha? You're going to do this in your homework, or in you do it in this project for testing passwords. There is also the option of, is it lower or is it upper? So is this a lowercase letter or is this an uppercase letter? If it is not a lowercase letter, it will return false. If it is not an uppercase letter, it will return false. So if it were a digit, it would return false, both of them, because it's neither lower or upper. You cannot be guaranteed with is lower and upper that if is lower is false, then is upper is true, because it could be a digit or a special character. You also have the concept of an is space. Spaces will return either spaces, new lines, or tabs. So if you have a space, new line, or tab, and you want to find out whether that value is a space, you can use the is space method to determine that. Okay, remember these all return Boolean values. They return either true or false, so you can use them in conditionals, but they do not alter anything at this point. We're just checking. These are just testing our strings to find out things about them, but we're not altering anything, okay? Now these methods are modifying the string. Remember, modifying doesn't mean it's actually modifying the string. It returns a copy of the string that is modified as you've asked. So you're going to have to say my string equals my string dot lower, my string equals my string dot strip. We've done these, especially when we did file IO, where we talked about stripping off that /n at the end of our strings to make sure that we got those out of there. So these are the string modification methods. They're listed probably alphabetical here, but I like to think of them in groups. So we have our lower and our upper. So lower and upper is going to take the string and turn it all into lowercase, or it's going to take the string and it's going to turn it all into uppercase. It's kind of nice when you're comparing things or checking values to turn everything into a lowercase or an uppercase so that you don't have to check capital Y or lowercase y. You can just check Y. And if you turned it all into lowercase, you can just check lowercase y. So it doesn't matter if the user entered lowercase or uppercase. It doesn't matter if they entered title case. It doesn't matter if they entered camel case. Everything's fine because you purposely pushed that entire string to all be lowercase or all be uppercase. We have our strip methods, our left strip, right strip, and total strip. And these strip methods both have a no parameter or a character parameter. So the strip with no parameter defaults to white space. So a strip with nothing in it will strip off all of your leading right space or your leading or your following white space characters. Your new lines, your tabs, and spaces are all going to be taken away. So if you put in space, 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 hello, it would strip off those first 5 spaces without having to put a character in there. And the reason why is because sometimes you want to just do all of your white space, all of your tabs, all of your new lines, and all of your spaces all at the same time. Right and left strip will just do the preceding or the leading or the succeeding, the ones at the end or ending values. Now you can use your strip methods with a character as well. So I want to remove all of my L's or all of my K's or all of my number ones, all of my periods. I want to remove those and I want to just strip those off. Again, right strip and left strip will go up until that first non-stripped value, and then it'll stop stripping. So stripping will only go up to the first non-stripped value, either direction if you did right or left, but if you want to return them all, you can take all of that character or all of that white space and have it be gone, both the front and the back. Okay. So that is your strip and your lower and upper. These will return a copy. They all return a copy. They do not modify the string itself. They just return a copy. So you have to make sure you do an assignment to get that to be what the value is of that variable at this point. Sometimes we want to go through a string and we want to search through and find something. And we want to do something with that once we find it. So I might want to go through my string and find everything that has a certain substring in it. I want to remove all the ands. I want to remove all the uhs, something like that. So I can go through and I can do a find on my string and it will return the lowest index that is equal to the value that I've asked for. This will allow me to go through my string until I get all of those out. I can do it in a loop. But it allows me to find out if that substring exists. If it does not exist, it will return a -1, which is a nice little check that says if find substring is not -1, is greater than -1 or a 0 or greater, then I know that that substring existed in my string. We also have the replace, which does similar to a find, except that when it finds the value, it replaces it with a new value. So it'll take that old substring out and it'll replace it with a new substring. We also have ends with and starts with. Both similar functions in that it's going to say, get me all the substrings that exist in this string and return true if the string ends with this thing. So when I'm looking through my my string, I can do a loop. I can do a loop through a list of strings. I can check values, but for each string, I can say, does it end with this? Is it, an adverb because it ends with ly? Is it an even number because, well, no, I wouldn't do that with numbers. We would only do with strings. So ends with and starts with will return true if the string starts with the substring that you've given them. Ends with will return true if it ends with the substring that you've given it. Okay, so it'll go through to the end and it'll count my substring as 5 characters, so it'll look just at the last 5 characters and compare, see, make sure they're the same. Okay, so now I'd like you to stop for a few seconds and go do the you do it on page 424. This is program 8.6, and this is validating a password. So all of you have tried to do a password at some point, and I'm sure at some point someone has yelled at you and said, no, your password is too short. Your password doesn't include a character. It doesn't include a special character. It doesn't include a number, and they yell at you, and it's annoying. So it's always fun to kind of write the code that you would have to do to validate your password. How do you know you got the good password? So we need to check a couple of things, and the code in the book, we'll go ahead and walk you through it. You need to check the length, make sure that it's at least 7 characters. Then you need to check to make sure that at least one of your characters is uppercase, at least one of them is lowercase, and at least one of them is a number. So we're just going to check these 3 different pieces of information about our string, make sure that they exist. So go have fun with this one and come on back when you're done. So hopefully that was a little bit of fun. You could go practice with validating your passwords, and hopefully you got all the code to work right. Make sure that when you run through the udoits, that you get the output you want, because just the act of you typing it word for word from what somebody else has done really does help. So on this one, we're going to talk about our repetition operator. So again, with lists, we can do the same thing. I want to make my list of 0 numbers. I can do a repetition operator with a string. So in this case, I am creating kind of a little arrow with my z's, where I'm using a for loop to go up to 10 z's and then back down from 8 to 0 to see my different z's. In this case, I can do z and then times count, whatever the count was, 1 through 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then go back from 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and be able to have 7 z's or 8 z's or 2 z's. And that's what I'm printing. Again, I'm not assigning this to a variable. I'm not changing the value of anything. I'm just printing the z times the count. I could say my new string equals z times count if I wanted to do that. So this is your repetition operator when it comes to strings. Again, works just like the lists do. One of the really convenient functions with strings is our split. So what a split will do is it will try to split the string on some sort of separator variable, usually a character. Usually the default is a space. So if I have 10 words in a phrase, say I have a phrase and it has 10 words and they're separated by a space, because that's what we do in English, is we separate words by spaces, I can split my string and it will create a list of each of the individual words, which means really quickly I could take an essay, run split on the essay, and count how many items were in my list, and that would tell me my word count. So this is one of the ways that we come up with word counts. We can also have, these are the individual words. You could do how many times does a single word exist in your essay, and you could run through the code and say how many times does this word repeat itself. So the split is really convenient. You don't have to do it with spaces, so you can give it a separator like a comma or a new line character or an underscore or something else that you want to do, a bar or a dash, as your separator character that is going to say, every time I see this character, I want to split. A lot of times people will use tab because they want it to print nicely with tabs between everything, but they also want to split on the tabs. So we can use the split method to be able to split our string into a list and then be able to manipulate the list of individual items from that string. So this is a really, really convenient function. And that is chapter 8. It wasn't that long. And hopefully you had time to read the chapter and understand it while I'm going over it. Your homework for chapter 8, obviously, is chapter 8 quiz. And then 5 exercises from the book. So 2, 4, 6, 10, and 12. At this point, I don't believe there's a turtle exercise, so this isn't a turtle one, but this is just a couple of exercises. I didn't put a whole lot. I figured you guys spent a lot of time on your midterm. I wanted to kind of make it a little easy this week, but do please go in and do the chapter 8 quiz and do those 5 exercises. They'll be due on Thursday. Have a fabulous week, and I will talk to you soon.